A manila envelope arrives at an undisclosed location in Tel Aviv. Inside, documents that have remained buried for 60 years. Photographs of a man laughing with Syrian generals. A key to an apartment overlooking Damascus's most sensitive military buildings. Letters written by a wife who never stopped believing her husband would come home. The man in these photographs lived under a name that wasn't his own. He spoke Arabic like a native, moved through Damascus high society like he belonged there, and died on a rope in the center of the city he had betrayed. His real name was Eli Cohen, and his story raises a question that haunts intelligence services to this day. How far can you disappear into someone else's life before you lose yourself completely? This archive, delivered through channels that remain classified, might finally bring him home. But what price did he pay for living in the shadows? And what does it mean when a spy becomes so successful that even his enemies can't let him go? Don't forget to like, leave a comment, and subscribe. You are not here by accident. Picture Damascus in the 1960s, a city where whispers carry more weight than headlines, where the wrong friendship can end a career, and where everyone watches everyone else. Into this world stepped a man calling himself Kamil Amin Thaabet, a Syrian businessman with family money and expensive tastes. But Kamil Amin Thaabet was a ghost. The real person behind that identity had been born Eli Cohen in Alexandria, Egypt, 1924. His family traced their roots to Aleppo, the same Syrian city where decades later he would claim his heritage. This wasn't coincidence. It was preparation. Cohen's journey into the shadows began with rejection. When he first applied to Mossad in 1956, they turned him down. His Hebrew, they said, sounded too archaic. The Hebrew of someone who had learned it as a foreign language rather than absorbed it naturally. For most people, this would have ended the story. For Cohen, it was just the beginning of a longer game. He worked as an accountant for years, married Nadia, started a family, lived the life of an ordinary Israeli citizen while something else stirred beneath the surface. When Mossad finally came calling in 1960, they found a man who had been unconsciously preparing his entire life for deep cover work. The Arabic he spoke wasn't learned from textbooks. It was the language of his childhood, complete with the precise regional accent of Aleppo. His understanding of Syrian culture wasn't theoretical. It was lived experience passed down through family stories and cultural memory. When he stepped into the role of Kamil Amin Thaabet, he wasn't just assuming a cover identity. He was becoming someone he might have been in another life. Buenos Aires, 1961. Cohen arrives with new papers, a new history, and enough money to live like the wealthy Syrian businessman he claims to be. But money alone doesn't create believability. What transforms a cover story into reality is the accumulation of 1,000 small details. Cohen didn't just memorize facts about his fictional family's business interests. He absorbed the cultural rhythms of Syrian expatriate life in Argentina. He learned which football teams the Syrian community supported, which restaurants served food that reminded them of home, which political arguments divided families at dinner tables. At the Syrian embassy, he becomes a familiar face, not pushy or overly curious, just another wealthy exile maintaining connections to the homeland. He attends cultural events, contributes to community causes, speaks passionately about Syrian politics in exactly the way a successful businessman with time on his hands might do. The transformation is so complete that when Syrian officials offer him introductions to contacts back home, it feels natural rather than suspicious. By the time Cohen prepares to leave Buenos Aires for Damascus, Kamil Amin Thaabet has developed a reputation, a network, and most importantly, a believable reason to return to Syria. But beneath this carefully constructed identity, something more complex is happening. Cohen isn't just playing a role, he's discovering parts of himself that might have existed if history had taken different turns. The line between performance and reality begins to blur in ways that no training manual could have prepared him for. The apartment Cohen rents in Damascus overlooks two of the most sensitive buildings in Syria, military headquarters and the presidential guest palace. From his living room window, he can observe which lights stay on late into the night, which vehicles arrive for unscheduled meetings, which officials hurry through entrances that should be routine. This positioning seems almost impossibly fortunate, but luck in espionage often disguises careful planning. Cohen doesn't choose this location by accident. He studies patterns, maps, sightlines, and understands that the most valuable intelligence sometimes comes from simply watching who talks to whom and when. His social life becomes an extension of his surveillance operation, but not in the way popular culture depicts espionage. There are no dramatic seductions or stolen documents passed in dark alleys. Instead, Cohen operates through the more subtle currency of friendship, generosity, and shared interests. He hosts dinner parties where Syrian military officers relax over expensive whiskey and talk shop. He lends money without asking for immediate repayment. He remembers birthdays, asks about family members, and listens to complaints about bureaucracy and promotion policies. In short, he becomes the kind of friend that powerful men value, someone with no official agenda who provides a refuge from the pressures of their positions. The intelligence he gathers flows from these relationships naturally. A casual comment about new Soviet equipment becomes a detailed briefing on tank deliveries. A friend's invitation to visit military installations on the Golan Heights turns into comprehensive reconnaissance of Israeli border defenses. While Cohen builds his social network in Damascus, his lifeline to Tel Aviv operates through technology that seems almost primitive by today's standards. His communications with Mossad depend on two fragile systems: coded messages embedded in Arabic songs broadcast from Israel, and a portable radio transmitter hidden in his apartment. The incoming messages arrive disguised as music requests from fictional radio listeners. Cohen tunes to specific frequencies at predetermined times, listening for songs that signal new instructions or acknowledge his reports. The system is elegant in its simplicity, but it requires perfect timing and absolute secrecy. His outgoing reports travel through the radio transmitter, coded messages tapped out in the darkness of his apartment. Cohen operates the equipment himself. There is no backup, no local handler, no safety net if something goes wrong. Every transmission increases the risk of detection, but the intelligence he provides is too valuable to restrict. The reports he sends transform Israeli understanding of Syrian military capabilities. Tank deliveries from the Soviet Union are documented within hours of their arrival. Strategic plans for attacking Israeli water sources are transmitted before Syrian field commanders receive their briefings. Minefield locations and artillery positions on the Golan Heights are mapped with precision that will prove crucial in future conflicts. But each transmission also leaves an electronic fingerprint in the atmosphere above Damascus. Syrian counterintelligence knows someone is operating in their capital. They can detect the signals, measure their strength, even estimate their general location. What they cannot do is pinpoint the source precisely enough to act. Not yet. By 1964, Cohen has achieved something remarkable in the world of espionage. He has become genuinely indispensable to the people he is betraying. Syrian military officers seek his advice on personal matters. Government officials invite him to official functions. There are even half-serious suggestions that he should consider running for political office. But success in deep cover operations carries its own dangers. The more valuable an agent becomes, the more attention they attract. The more access they gain, the more suspicious their access appears to trained counterintelligence officers. Syrian security services know they have a problem. Too much sensitive information is leaking to Israeli intelligence. The leaks are too timely, too specific, and too consistently accurate to be explained by casual security breaches or low-level corruption. Someone with high-level access is feeding intelligence to the enemy. The investigation begins with surveillance of known contacts and monitoring of communications patterns. Syrian counterintelligence officers start mapping social networks, tracking who attends which gatherings, noting which conversations precede which security breaches. Cohen's name doesn't immediately surface as suspicious. His cover identity remains solid, and his behavior patterns match those of other wealthy expatriates. But the circle of potential suspects steadily narrows. The Syrians request technical assistance from Soviet intelligence specialists, who arrive in Damascus with equipment designed to solve exactly this type of problem. The electronic hunt begins in earnest. Radio direction-finding equipment is positioned around the city, operated by technicians trained to track clandestine transmissions. The net tightens slowly but systematically, using triangulation methods that can pinpoint a radio transmitter to within a city block, then within a building, and finally to a specific apartment. January 18, 1965. Cohen sits at his radio transmitter, fingers moving across the telegraph key, sending what he doesn't know will be his final message to Tel Aviv. The coded transmission carries intelligence about Soviet military advisors and new defensive positions, routine but valuable information that has become the foundation of Israeli military planning. Outside his apartment, Syrian counterintelligence operatives receive confirmation from their radio tracking equipment. 4 separate direction-finding stations have locked onto the transmission source. The signals converge on a single point: the building where Kamil Amin Thaabet, respected businessman and friend to Syrian military leadership, maintains his residence. The arrest happens with brutal efficiency. The apartment door splinters under the impact of Syrian security forces. Cohen, caught in the act of transmission, cannot deny what he is doing. The radio equipment is still warm, coded messages are scattered across his desk, and his cover identity evaporates in the space of seconds. The man who had spent years becoming Kamil Amin Thaabet suddenly reverts to being Eli Cohen, Israeli spy. But this transformation happens without the careful preparation that had marked all his previous identity changes. There is no time to adjust, no opportunity to prepare psychologically for what comes next. In the chaos of the arrest, Syrian officers search the apartment systematically. They find false documents, coded materials, photographs of military installations, and even explosives hidden for emergency use. Each discovery confirms what they already know, that the man they had trusted, entertained, and befriended has been systematically betraying them for years. The interrogation of Eli Cohen becomes a matter of national importance in Syria. This is not just the capture of a foreign spy. This is the exposure of a deception so complete that it strikes at the foundation of Syrian military security. Officers who had shared classified information over dinner, who had brought Cohen to restricted military sites, who had treated him as family, now face the humiliation of having been thoroughly deceived. Cohen's interrogation involves no legal representation, no diplomatic intervention, and no hope of procedural protection. Syrian intelligence officers work to extract every detail of his operations, his contacts, his methods, his sources of information. but they also seem driven by a more personal need to understand how completely they had been fooled. The psychological dimension of Cohen's betrayal cuts deeper than simple espionage. In a culture where personal relationships carry profound significance, where trust is built through years of shared experiences and mutual obligations, Cohen's deception feels like a violation of fundamental social contracts. Meanwhile, in Israel, desperate attempts to save Cohen's life begin immediately after his arrest becomes known. Israeli officials approach foreign governments, religious leaders, and international organizations, seeking any possible intervention. Offers are made: prisoner exchanges, financial payments, diplomatic concessions. Israeli military planners even develop scenarios for armed rescue operations. But the Syrian response remains inflexible. Cohen has not just committed espionage, he has made Syrian leadership look foolish in front of their own military and intelligence services. This is not the kind of humiliation that can be resolved through negotiation or financial incentives. In his final days, Eli Cohen writes to his wife, Nadia. The letters, delivered through the Damascus rabbi who serves the remaining Jewish community, carry the weight of a man trying to compress a lifetime of unfinished conversations into a few pages. Cohen urges Nadia to remarry, to build a new life without waiting for his return. He acknowledges that their marriage existed largely in the spaces between his assignments, that she has already sacrificed years to his absence. These letters reveal something about the cost of deep cover operations that training manuals never address, the way that assuming false identities can hollow out authentic relationships. He writes about their children, offers advice for raising them alone, tries to explain decisions he cannot fully justify even to himself. The man who had spent years perfecting the art of deception struggles to find words that convey truth to the people who matter most. On May 18, 1965, Eli Cohen is hanged in Damascus's central square. Syrian authorities leave his body on display for hours, a message to anyone who might consider similar betrayals. But even this final humiliation carries an unintended consequence. It transforms Cohen from a successful spy into something approaching martyrdom. The execution marks the beginning of a 60-year struggle by Israel to bring his body home. This effort will involve diplomatic negotiations, covert operations, and ultimately, a waiting game that outlasts governments and outlives many of the original participants. The moment news of Cohen's arrest reached Tel Aviv, Israeli leadership faced an impossible equation. How do you save a man whose very existence represents the most sensitive intelligence operation in the nation's history? How do you negotiate for someone whose identity cannot be acknowledged without compromising everything he died to protect? Within hours of his capture, Israeli officials launched what would become one of the most comprehensive rescue efforts in intelligence history. Prime Minister Levi Eshkol personally authorized operations that violated every conventional diplomatic protocol. The message was clear: Israel would risk international relationships, intelligence assets, and enormous financial resources to bring one man home. The first approach came through traditional diplomatic channels. Israeli ambassadors in European capitals received urgent instructions to contact their Syrian counterparts through back-channel communications. Switzerland, Austria, and France all became intermediaries in conversations that officially never happened. The Swiss ambassador to Damascus received authorization to offer payments that exceeded the annual budgets of small nations. But money alone proved insufficient. Syrian officials made it clear that Cohen's betrayal transcended simple espionage. This was personal humiliation that demanded personal satisfaction. The man who had sat at their dinner tables, who had listened to their private conversations, who had photographed their children at family gatherings, had made them look foolish in front of the entire Arab world. Israeli negotiators then shifted to prisoner exchange proposals. Lists were compiled of Syrian agents in Israeli custody, Palestinian militants captured in border operations, even common criminals whose families had Syrian connections. Every possible human currency was evaluated and offered. The Syrians reviewed each proposal with bureaucratic thoroughness before rejecting them all. The most audacious diplomatic effort involved Pope Paul VI. Israeli officials, working through Jewish communities in Rome, managed to secure papal intervention on humanitarian grounds. The Vatican issued carefully worded statements about mercy and the value of human life. Syrian authorities, mindful of Christian minority populations within their borders, received these appeals with respectful silence and proceeded with their plans unchanged. As diplomatic options exhausted themselves, Israeli military planners began developing scenarios that violated every principle of international law. Operation blueprints emerged for helicopter raids on Damascus, commando strikes on the prison where Cohen was held, even diversionary attacks designed to create chaos sufficient for rescue operations. The most seriously considered plan involved a simultaneous assault on multiple Syrian government facilities. Israeli special forces would attack communications centers, power stations, and military headquarters, while a specialized team extracted Cohen from his detention facility. Military analysts calculated that such an operation could succeed, but only at the cost of regional war and hundreds of casualties. Senior Israeli officials ultimately rejected military intervention, not because it was impossible, but because success would require sacrificing everything Cohen had worked to protect. Rescuing one spy by triggering broader conflict would nullify years of intelligence gathering and compromise Israel's strategic position throughout the region. In the final weeks before his execution, Israeli efforts became increasingly desperate and creative. Proposals were made to Syrian business leaders with government connections. Bribes were offered to prison guards and court officials. Islamic religious authorities were approached with arguments about merciful justice and the value of life in Islamic law. Each rejection brought Israeli officials closer to a terrible realization. Cohen had become too valuable as a symbol for Syria to release. His execution would demonstrate Syrian strength and resolve. His freedom would suggest Syrian weakness and gullibility. In the calculus of Middle Eastern politics, one man's life weighed less than national prestige. Even as diplomatic efforts continued, something else began happening to Eli Cohen's story. It started becoming legend. Israeli media, operating under military censorship, could report only fragments of his capture and trial. These limitations created space for speculation, rumor, and eventual mythology that would surround his name for decades. The first myths emerged during his trial itself. Reports filtered back to Israel suggesting that Cohen had maintained his cover identity even under interrogation, that Syrian officials still believed they might have arrested the wrong man. These stories, whether accurate or not, fed growing narratives about his extraordinary capabilities and unbreakable dedication. After his execution, Israeli intelligence services faced a delicate balance between honoring his sacrifice and protecting operational security. Details of his work could not be revealed without compromising ongoing operations and exposing other agents still in the field. This necessary secrecy created fertile ground for increasingly dramatic speculation about his achievements. Popular accounts began crediting Cohen with intelligence coups that stretched credibility. Stories circulated that he had influenced major Syrian military decisions, that he had prevented Arab unity efforts that might have changed regional history, that his information had single-handedly enabled Israeli victory in the Six-Day War. Some of these claims contained elements of truth. Cohen's intelligence about Golan Heights fortifications certainly contributed to Israeli military planning. But the tendency toward mythologization transformed a successful spy into something approaching a supernatural figure who had manipulated entire governments through sheer force of personality. The most persistent myth involved Cohen allegedly convincing Syrian officers to plant trees over artillery positions to provide shade for their crews. According to this story, Israeli pilots used these trees as targeting markers during the Six-Day War. The tale became so widely accepted that military historians had to repeatedly debunk it. Trees require years to grow, while Cohen's exposure of Syrian positions happened months before the conflict. International media contributed to the legend-building process, often repeating Israeli claims without independent verification. Western journalists, lacking access to Syrian sources, relied heavily on Israeli intelligence briefings that naturally emphasized Cohen's successes while minimizing his limitations and failures. Hollywood eventually discovered Cohen's story, but cinematic requirements transformed it beyond recognition. Films depicted him as a master manipulator who controlled Syrian policy through elaborate psychological games. These portrayals bore little resemblance to the methodical intelligence gathering that characterized his actual operations, but they reinforced public perceptions of his almost mystical capabilities. The myth-making process served political purposes for both sides. Israelis gained a heroic figure who embodied successful intelligence operations and patriotic sacrifice. Syrians gained a cautionary tale about the dangers of foreign infiltration and the need for constant vigilance against Israeli deception. But the myths also obscured important lessons about intelligence work. Cohen's real achievements came through patience, careful relationship building, and systematic information gathering, qualities that require different skills than the dramatic confrontations depicted in popular culture. 60 years after Cohen's passing, his influence on intelligence operations continues in ways both obvious and subtle. Every major intelligence service studies his case, not just for tactical lessons, but for insights into the psychological requirements of deep cover work. At Israeli intelligence training facilities, Cohen's methods are dissected with academic precision. New operatives learn about his social engineering techniques, how he built trust through small favors, how he positioned himself as a valuable contact rather than an obvious intelligence target, how he maintained operational security while appearing completely transparent. But the Cohen case also illustrates the limitations of individual brilliance in intelligence work. His success depended on specific historical circumstances, a Syrian society where personal relationships carried enormous weight, a regional conflict where traditional loyalties were being tested, and communication technologies that made clandestine contact possible but difficult to detect. Modern intelligence operations face different challenges. Digital communications leave electronic traces that 1960s radio transmissions never created. Social media makes maintaining false identities exponentially more complex. Background verification systems would quickly expose the kind of fabricated history that supported Cohen's cover. Yet certain elements of his approach remain relevant. His understanding that effective intelligence gathering requires genuine human connections rather than technological sophistication continues to influence training programs. His demonstration that cultural authenticity matters more than perfect documentation still shapes how operatives prepare for overseas assignments. Other intelligence services have attempted to replicate Cohen's success with mixed results. Soviet operations in Western countries during the Cold War showed similar patterns. illegal operatives establishing themselves in business communities, building social networks that provided access to political and military information, maintaining cover identities for years or even decades. The most successful operations shared Cohen's emphasis on patience and relationship building. Operatives who tried to accelerate intelligence gathering through more aggressive methods typically exposed themselves quickly. The lesson became clear. Effective deep cover work requires thinking in terms of years rather than months, relationships rather than transactions. But Cohen's case also highlighted the human costs of such operations. Psychological studies of returned deep cover operatives reveal consistent patterns: difficulty maintaining authentic relationships, problems with identity and self-perception, challenges readjusting to normal social interactions after years of calculated deception. Modern intelligence services now provide better psychological support for operatives in long-term assignments, partly in response to lessons learned from cases like Cohen's. The recognition that successful intelligence work can destroy the people who perform it has led to rotation policies, mental health monitoring, and support systems that didn't exist in the 1960s. In modern Israel, Eli Cohen exists simultaneously as historical figure and national symbol, but the relationship between these two identities grows more complex with time. Streets, schools, and military installations bear his name throughout the country. His story appears in textbooks as an example of patriotic sacrifice and professional excellence. But this official commemoration serves purposes beyond simple remembrance. Cohen's story reinforces narratives about Israeli vulnerability and the need for exceptional measures to ensure national survival. His sacrifice validates the intelligence services and their methods. His success demonstrates that individual dedication can overcome seemingly impossible odds. Political leaders routinely invoke Cohen's example when justifying controversial intelligence operations or requesting increased security budgets. His willingness to sacrifice everything for national security becomes a standard against which other choices are measured. The man who died in Damascus has become a political tool in discussions he never could have anticipated. This symbolism sometimes conflicts with historical accuracy. The real Cohen made mistakes, experienced doubts, and succeeded partly through luck and favorable circumstances. The symbolic Cohen represents perfect dedication and flawless execution. These different versions serve different purposes but create confusion about what actually happened and why it mattered. Israeli society's relationship with Cohen's legacy also reflects broader tensions about the role of intelligence services in democratic societies. His story validates the need for secret operations while raising questions about the human costs of such activities. It celebrates individual sacrifice while highlighting the prices families pay for national security decisions. Public discussions about Cohen often become proxies for debates about contemporary intelligence operations. Supporters of aggressive intelligence gathering point to his success as justification for current policies. Critics note the personal costs and question whether such sacrifices remain necessary or effective in changed circumstances. The passage of time has also revealed new perspectives on Cohen's work. Documents released decades after his passing show that some of his intelligence was less crucial than originally claimed, while other reports proved more valuable than initially recognized. This reassessment complicates simple, heroic narratives while confirming the basic validity of his contributions. Educational programs about Cohen face the challenge of presenting complex historical realities to audiences more familiar with simplified, heroic stories. Teachers must balance respect for his sacrifice against critical analysis of intelligence operations and their consequences. The recent delivery of Cohen's personal archive raises fundamental questions about intelligence work that extend far beyond his specific case. These documents provide unprecedented insight into the psychological reality of deep cover operations. But they also highlight ethical dilemmas that intelligence services still struggle to resolve. The photographs in the archive show Cohen appearing genuinely happy in the company of Syrian officers who trusted him completely. These images raise uncomfortable questions about the moral implications of betraying people who have extended friendship and hospitality. How does an operative maintain humanity while systematically deceiving everyone around them? Professional intelligence training emphasizes emotional compartmentalization, the ability to separate personal feelings from operational requirements. But Cohen's archive suggests that complete compartmentalization may be impossible for psychologically healthy individuals. The most effective operatives may be those who can form genuine connections while serving ulterior purposes. This paradox has implications for how intelligence services recruit and train deep cover operatives. Candidates who can easily deceive others may lack the empathy necessary for building believable relationships. Those capable of authentic connection may struggle with the psychological conflicts inherent in betraying trust. Modern neuroscience offers insights into these dilemmas that weren't available during Cohen's era. Research on social bonding and trust suggests that humans are neurologically wired for reciprocal relationships. Sustained deception may require overriding fundamental psychological mechanisms, potentially causing long-term mental health consequences. The archive also reveals the impact of Cohen's work on his family relationships. Letters between him and Nadia show the strain of maintaining normal marriage dynamics while living fundamentally dishonest professional lives. Children grow up with absent fathers whose work cannot be explained or understood. These family costs raise questions about the ethics of requesting such sacrifices from intelligence operatives and their families. Is it morally acceptable to ask people to risk everything for national security objectives? How should societies balance individual welfare against collective security needs? Contemporary intelligence operations face similar dilemmas in different contexts. Digital surveillance capabilities allow unprecedented access to private communications, but their use requires similar calculations about individual privacy versus collective security. The questions Cohen's case raises about the limits of acceptable sacrifice remain relevant in changed technological circumstances. The archive materials also highlight the role of chance in intelligence success. Cohen's achievements depended on favorable circumstances. Syrian officers who happened to be susceptible to his particular social approach, technical systems that could be exploited with available technology, political situations that created opportunities for intelligence gathering. This recognition of contingency complicates heroic narratives about intelligence work. Success may depend more on luck and favorable circumstances than on exceptional skill or dedication. This doesn't diminish Cohen's achievements, but it suggests that his methods might not translate directly to different contexts or time periods. The enduring fascination with Cohen's story reflects broader human curiosity about identity, deception, and the costs of loyalty. His experience of living completely within a false identity touches on fundamental questions about selfhood and authenticity that extend beyond intelligence operations. Today, as Syrian authorities consider returning Eli Cohen's remains to Israel, his story continues to evolve from history into legend and back again. The archive delivered to Israeli authorities provides documentary evidence that grounds fantastical stories in mundane realities, while confirming the essential truth of his extraordinary sacrifice. The materials reveal a man who was simultaneously ordinary and exceptional, someone who succeeded through methodical preparation and careful relationship building, rather than dramatic confrontations or miraculous escapes. His greatest achievement was not superhuman deception, but rather the ability to remain fundamentally human while serving inhuman purposes. Whether Cohen's body will finally return to Israeli soil depends on political calculations that extend far beyond his individual case. Current Syrian leadership faces its own challenges in establishing legitimacy and managing relationships with neighboring countries. Gestures of reconciliation carry political costs that must be weighed against potential benefits. But the archive itself represents a form of homecoming that transcends political negotiations. These documents restore historical complexity to a story that had become oversimplified through decades of myth-making. They reveal both the achievements and limitations of intelligence work, while honoring the human costs of national security decisions. Cohen's legacy ultimately raises more questions than it answers about the nature of loyalty, identity, and sacrifice in service of abstract political concepts. His story illuminates both the possibilities and dangers of intelligence operations, while highlighting the personal costs that statistics and policy discussions rarely acknowledge. The shadow between worlds that Cohen inhabited for years in Damascus has become a permanent part of regional history. His influence on Israeli intelligence capabilities contributed to military victories that shaped Middle Eastern politics for decades. But his personal sacrifice also represents the human costs of conflicts that continue to demand similar prices from new generations. The questions his life poses about the limits of acceptable deception, the costs of national loyalty, and the psychological requirements of intelligence work remain as relevant today as they were in the Damascus apartments where he transmitted his final coded messages home. His archive has returned to Israel. His story continues to evolve between myth and reality. His influence on intelligence operations persists in training programs and operational methods worldwide. But the man himself remains in Syrian soil, a reminder that even the most successful intelligence operations exact prices that cannot be calculated in advance or easily justified afterward. The shadow has ended, but its legacy endures in every intelligence operative who faces similar choices between human connection and professional duty, in every family that sacrifices personal relationships for national security, and in every society that must balance individual costs against collective survival. Eli Cohen's final message may be that heroism in intelligence work lies not in dramatic gestures or impossible achievements, but in the willingness to maintain humanity while serving inhuman purposes, and in accepting that some shadows, once cast, can never be completely erased. With Syria under new leadership for the first time in decades, the possibility of finally resolving Cohen's case has emerged. Syrian officials have indicated willingness to consider returning his remains as part of broader diplomatic initiatives with Israel. But 60 years of hostility cannot be erased by good intentions alone. The Cohen archive raises as many questions as it answers. How did a man maintain such deep psychological compartmentalization for years without losing himself entirely? What price did his family pay for his success? How do intelligence services weigh individual sacrifice against national security benefits? Perhaps most fundamentally, what does it mean to disappear so completely into someone else's identity that even your enemies cannot forget you? Cohen succeeded as a spy because he became genuinely likable, genuinely trustworthy, genuinely Syrian in ways that transcended mere performance. But this success created emotional bonds that complicated the simple narrative of professional duty. The photographs in the archive show Cohen laughing with Syrian officers who considered him a friend. The documents reveal intelligence so detailed that it could only come from relationships built on authentic human connection. The personal items suggest a man who found ways to be genuinely himself, even while living under a false identity. These materials tell the story of espionage as human drama rather than technological thriller. Cohen's greatest asset was not advanced equipment or sophisticated techniques. It was his ability to create real relationships with people he was professionally obligated to betray. Today, Eli Cohen exists simultaneously as historical figure, national symbol, and unresolved mystery. Streets bear his name throughout Israel. Intelligence training programs study his methods. His widow continues advocating for his return, representing not just personal loss, but national commitment to bringing every Israeli home. The recent archive delivery suggests that even former enemies recognize something significant about Cohen's story. His execution may have satisfied Syrian demands for justice, but his legacy has proven impossible to bury completely. Whether his remains will finally be returned to Israeli soil remains uncertain. Political calculations, diplomatic negotiations, and simple logistics all play roles in decisions about events that occurred 60 years ago. But the archive itself represents a form of homecoming, the return of documentary evidence that Eli Cohen existed, operated with extraordinary success, and paid the ultimate price for his service. In the end, Cohen's story illuminates the human cost of intelligence work in ways that policy discussions rarely acknowledge. Behind every successful espionage operation are individuals who sacrifice normal relationships, authentic identities, and often their lives for objectives they may never fully understand. The shadow between two worlds that Eli Cohen inhabited for years has finally begun to dissipate. But the questions his life raises about loyalty, identity, and the price of national security remain as relevant today as they were in the Damascus apartments where he transmitted his final message home. His legacy lives not in the specific intelligence he provided, but in the reminder that even the most sophisticated espionage operations ultimately depend on profoundly human qualities. The ability to inspire trust, to create genuine connections, and to maintain hope even when operating in the shadows. The archive has returned. The man himself may finally follow.